Two.
Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is July 23, 2021. We want to thank the great Clinton Ignatoff. Thank you, Clinton, for knowing which buttons to push and being a smart guy. I mean it. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with Joe Sehee. Joe, what a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Joe,
Pleasure to
the
be
first
here.
question. Yeah, the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Well, the best thing for this human being, I would say, is well, it's funny. For most of my life, I think I would have said being able to know love, being able to love and be loved, and I think today I'd say being able to be true to your authentic self.
Yeah. There's a role on that. I just interviewed another great filmmaker a couple of days ago, and he says, love and be loved. And about a month ago, I wrote an article on Eden Abez, the first hippie.
Yep.
He hung
Yep.
out, all about Eden Abez, and he wrote Nature Boy, and he came up with the line, to love and to be loved. It's amazing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's in Nature Boy, and it's just an amazing thing that it just keeps rolling on. So, Joe, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, up until recently, it had been, I love going directly to people, tracking people down that had knowledge. But just in the last couple of years, I've been trying to finish a master's degree that I started a few decades ago. And I've learned to do literature reviews and go online now, and you can access anything you want. And so I've been going down a lot of rabbit holes there. That's probably supplanted human contact.
Direct experience is an answer I get a lot. It's a beautiful thing. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
It probably was something that we had to do to learn to survive, and I was thinking about this the other day. I was having a conversation with a colleague about Indigenous Australians, and he was making the point that they didn't develop certain technologies that others have developed. And I said, well, they didn't need to. Their survival depended on being very much in harmony with the natural environment to survive for all those thousands of years, which was quite an accomplishment. But I really think, I always like to look at things through an evolutionary lens. And I think it probably did play a role in just allowing us to be adaptive and survive.
Right. So you're saying it's probably innate in humans.
I would think.
Yeah. No, that you raise a good point. It's an amazing thing. You're in Melbourne, Australia, and I'm in Venice, California, and it feels like we're right next to each other.
I know.
We are. It's a real pleasure. And so since you brought that up, I want to just go off on that for a second, because I use this in my discussions all the time. The Australian Aborigines have no word for boredom.
Wow.
So do they get bored? And we would go, well, they probably get bored, but they call it something different. But what do you know that? Is that true? Or I just heard that?
Gosh, I don't know that. I've just been learning about them recently. I happen to know they have the best examples in anywhere in the world of developing rituals connected to ecological restoration. And it's an amazing number of cultures, but I didn't know that about boredom. I'd think it would just be a word for hanging out,
Yeah. Do thoughts create emotions?
Definitely. They do. And they do for me.
Yeah. And so let's stay on thinking for a second. Do you think humans invented thinking, or is it more innate?
Oh, well, yes, I think it's definitely innate.
Yeah. How would you fill in this blank? I don't know what I think until I
until I experience things for myself. Unfortunately or fortunately, I have to. Some of us need to go through things and make things relevant, to really take it in and to really think. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah. Now, in general, of course, it's both. Some of these early questions are either ors, and you don't have to go with the two choices I give, but do you think humans, your interaction with humans, do you think humans are more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Yeah. God, that's a tough one. Well, we're obviously both, but and they're so connected. Really, I might lean toward feeling beings a lot of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what most people say. It's very interesting. You know what they usually say? I think we're more feeling beings.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I definitely more pursue meaning, and a lot of the times that leads to happiness.
Yeah.
Hopefully, more often than not. But I don't even like the way we define that term. I think in Western culture, we think it's just being upbeat, and we're really talking about being whole and healthy and living a meaningful life. Because happy, we're not meant to be happy all the time.
Right.
But we do have to mediate meaning, I think, to really be able to get up in the morning, or at least I do, keep going.
Really well put. So, do you think the brain more detects consciousness or creates consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
I think we're actually creating it. I think it
Yeah.
comes more from an internal source than being out there.
Yeah.
I think we can connect with other people's consciousness, other animals' consciousness. That too. I've
Yeah.
been doing a lot of that with magpies as of late.
Say that again.
I've been doing that with Australian magpies, these birds that I only knew because they swoop down on you when they're nesting, and they're vicious. They blinded people, but a couple of them have figured out how to. We're living temporarily in my wife's family home, and they come and they ask for food, but they really want a connection. And I figured out I would leave food out for them, and they're like they have this incredible call that they make, and I couldn't figure out why they just didn't want to eat the food that I left, like, because they like when I would throw it up in the air and in their beak, and I've even fed it to them out of the house, out of my hand. But I figured out that if I left it there, once I went back inside, a crow would come by and eat the whole lot. And they really wanted me to be understanding. I think that they wanted me to give it to it one at a time. But
Isn't that amazing? They need some sort of connection with another organism,
yeah,
living organism.
yeah,
That's
that's
like
funny.
ritual of eating. The ritual of eating, it seems as though yeah, I saw one of those stupid videos on YouTube where the guy's riding his bike and the magpie guy, he starts
Right,
pecking his bike
right.
helmet. It's like, wow.
Mm. They could recognize a couple hundred different faces, and if they know you've got a good one and you're friendly, they'll leave you alone. But if not, yeah.
Joe, this is fun. You get it. Okay, what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh God, with me, speed of light. I think most people, speed of light, definitely.
Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Pass. I just wanted to do that once, like a game show, but I'm going to pass.
That's fine. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I don't really worry about anything. That's one thing. I sleep very well. I've lived a life trying to do what I think makes sense, especially in the moment. And I don't go to bed with a lot of regrets or stresses. I think about what I want to get done the next day, probably more than anything.
Beautiful. Are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
Bad old ideas emerging as new ideas. I think there's way more bad ideas that we should be afraid of coming back, especially right now.
That is good. I got that question. Yeah, I think it's the guy who invented windshield wipers. So both of us being from the Motor City-ish area, Charles Kettering, he said, people are very open-minded about new things as long as they're exactly like the old ones.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you conjure up your earliest memory or one of them?
Yep. My earliest memory goes back, I probably was around 2 or 3. And I used to want to get out of bed in the morning and go right to this. It was my sister, who was 3.5 years older than me, had this little vanity set, this little mirror, 3 mirrors that she would, I guess, comb her hair for. I mean, she wasn't putting on makeup at that age. And there were a couple photos around there. I think one of her doing the first Holy Communion. But I wanted to train myself to go and pray. And I was telling my wife about this the other day. She said, well, I think the mirrors had probably something to do. You wanted to see yourself pray, maybe early sign of some narcissism. But that's the earliest memory that I have. And I would always beat myself up because I would be lollygagging in the morning, as you do at 2 or 3. And then I just didn't get to the prayer room. But yeah, very odd, because I never was a big prayer, but I was as a little kid.
Well, you must have ESP because you anticipated some really great upcoming questions. So is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, I think it's more a blessing. Definitely. Yeah.
So Joe, tell me someone in your immediate family who made an impact on you, sort of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Well, I had an aunt, my Aunt Mary, who used to come visit us at first for a couple weeks a year. She worked in the Anchor Hawking plant just outside of Pittsburgh. She wasn't married, so she would spend Christmas with us, and she would write letters and send candy. And she would then, when she got older, she'd spend longer times with us. And she just had this really incredibly optimistic view about life. And she might have been slightly developmentally disabled looking back on it, but it would drive the adults crazy. Like, she would be eating food and just, oh my God, this is the greatest, whatever, macaroni and cheese. And my dad would just roll his eyes. It's the 3rd time we've had it in 2 weeks, Mary. Give it a break. They were just frustrated by her. But she really, she was open and loving, and I never heard her say a negative thing about anyone. She was a beautiful, beautiful lady.
Wow.
And my dad too, we had some struggles for a lot of years, but he taught me some lessons when he was, he spent the last 19 months of his life in bed, in a diaper, waiting to go. He was having signs at the hospital that he was gonna die there, and didn't want to do that. So wanted me to take him home, and we did. And the guy became so gracious during that period. Imagine, having to spend your final days. And like my aunt too, he was lovely. He was really just incredible never complained for a minute about what he was going through, which was, pretty awful at a lot of the times, and always had a smile. And for much of his life, when I knew him growing up, he could be a little angry and agitated, but he had this really smooth way out and showed a lot of grace. That was really cool too.
It's a great, great story. And so what was his career basically?
He was a sort of a failed engineer, a wannabe engineer. He was an engineer in the Navy in World War II, or, on a ship, an electrician, wanted to be an electrical engineer, and failed out of a couple schools, and really ended up working. He worked for the gas company in Detroit,
Yeah.
first in sales and then in an administrative position. He was an amazing guy that could put anything together and was super organized and really thought like an engineer, just wasn't good in math, couldn't handle it.
So, Joe, tell me someone outside your immediate family who had an impact on you growing up, and what was that impact?
Gosh, it's funny. Depends how young you want to go. I think there are two guys that I really used to look up to growing up as sort of a teenager. Well, as a kid, my dad had this African-American minister friend. It was his best friend, Doc, who was this lovely guy too. He used to come around and really jovial. And, you know, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for a white suburbanite in Detroit to have a close relationship with a black person, right? And he was a lovely guy. My dad had gotten him a job at the gas company in the 50s when he was a janitor, and he came in to work for their team, and he just loved my dad. He was really inspiring. There was a funny hairdresser named Eddie Neppy who was just the coolest cat, you know, that I used to love. And he cut my hair, but he also cut like hairs for the hair of mobsters and other folks, celebrities in the Detroit area. But there were a couple of Jesuits that really had an impact, and one in particular, when I was in my early 20s, a liberation theologian by the name of Ignacio Martin Moreau. And I met this man when I spent 4 years directing the Peace and Social Justice program at the University of San Francisco, first through the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. And I was really just trying to find my way after having abandoned law school and figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. And I love this work, and I love what these guys were all about. And he was basically, he had pioneered this notion of liberation psychology, which was really quite new there, and worked with people who were traumatized by all the political oppression and violence of in Central America and in San Salvador in particular. So he invited us down. He was out in California to just explain, you know, what was going on. So I put together a sort of a delegation, peace fact-finding delegation in 1986, and we went down and visited him. And we met with him on these grounds at the University of San Francisco, University of Central America in San Salvador. And I'll never forget it. One of the scariest moments of my life, this loud helicopter sound that got closer and closer, that was buzzing the room, which, you know, and I was starting to get under a table, you know, to do the duck and cover. And he was just laughing. I remember, and he said, "Oh, it's just a gift from your President Reagan." You know, they were intimidating them all the time because he was working with the people. And after that meeting, another Jesuit and I took him out, and he said, "Look, they're not going to do anything. I'm not going. I'll take to the hills and, you know, with the guerrillas before I leave these people." And probably 3 years or so after that, he was one of 6 Jesuits and their housekeeper and her daughter who were killed there at the same grounds. Excuse me. I'm going to get a drink of water. But he and the other liberation theologians taught that, you know, heaven wasn't some place on earth. It's right here. And it's, you know, it's a place we bring about when we love one another. And it was a very, I mean, I was really moved by his life. Excuse me. And it's, you know, it was also a bit of a lesson in, you know, sometimes the suffering, the pain, the hits that you're going to take doing work that could be disruptive and threatening to people. But he lived a very meaningful life, and I know wouldn't have had it any other way.
That was well put. Really well. Leads into this perfect. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Yeah. Well, I think that circumstances, get just to the point where people can be made evil. They're drawn into circumstances, or they're traumatized enough to where they can't sort of navigate through the world and avoid that. It's really hard to have compassion for evil people, but if you look at the roots of what they're dealing with, you see really broken, battered people. uh, I think it's more often something that more often than not, it's those external factors that contribute to making someone evil, I think.
Yeah. And so this question, I'm going to follow up with a few modern thinkers'
Yeah.
thoughts before it's, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Detroit-born Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of thoughts. The question is, how do you advise someone to deal with the enemy? But first, Joe, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Yeah. That's a beautiful thought. And I've tried to take that advice. I've had a couple people that were enemies, and I couldn't quite work it out. It took me a long time to understand what they might have been threatened by or what happened. And I've had a couple repairs with some enemies in the last couple of years that have been it's been really great. But I think he's right. I think that you can really go down into some. I think I formed two nonprofit organizations because of not knowing how to deal with enemies properly. But I really think that we can, give too much oxygen to those relationships. There's a concept of backdraft that's taught in mindful self-compassion, which is a course that's been developed recently by a woman psychologist named Christine Neff in the States. And she talks about backdraft as this notion of learning to not give too much oxygen to something. If when something comes up where you're triggered, to step away and to look at it with some detachment. And I think sometimes when we're dealing with enemies, we're charged, that amygdala fires up and we want to, engage. And I think Watts is really onto something. We need to step back and not necessarily make that person an enemy. Oftentimes we can back away enough, but I do think we need to be careful of enemies being out there and not think that they shouldn't dictate how we live our lives. But I don't think it's a bad thing to know that they're in fact out there.
It's really good. It's like conscious breathing in conscious breath, out giving oxygen to anything. It's just, we're actually going to cover that a little later, but I would like you to respond to this if you could. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He had a movie theater and he says, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Right. Well, and it's a struggle I have with my wife. I'm always prone to want to watch nonfiction film and read nonfiction books. But I understand the role of storytelling, and we need story to learn and understand. If we're going to have develop our own stories, oftentimes we allow them to be modeled on other stories. So I think there's a role for stories, but I feel very strongly about the idea of living life and yeah, experiencing it. I mean, personally, I used to do work as a performance artist, a comedian on stage for a few years, where I was playing around some themes, and we had a lot of fun. But there were always, I always wanted to use real people if we were doing videos related to things, or even in live shows. And it was always dicey because you couldn't control things. But in the moment, because you were dealing with people who were, real, there was not only this authenticity that was very engaging, but you were brought into this moment because you didn't know what was going to happen. And you never, it drove crazy some development execs that wanted to do something with the show that, it just, I didn't have any interest in putting it into a form that was going to be, nicely coiffed and made accessible. That just wasn't interesting to me. But I do think that, there's a role for fiction and good stories always.
Yeah, Joe, that was really good because you've talked a little about your background. You pursued the Jesuit sort of studies, then you went to law school, and then you got into social activism. But what first attracted you to performance art? And your act, Joey Cheesy, is how I knew you from the 80s in LA. You were infamous singing on roller skates. So what sort of got you going before you started the act? Who were you seeing going, well, I can do that?
Yeah. Well, I had this one role model. There was a lounge singer in this Detroit area bar called Bob and Rob's, a guy named Bob Chambers. And he had this great little combo. Actually, the bass player was Donnie Fagenson. Don was from Was Not Was, and the producer. Amazing band, Lenore Paxton Trio. And Bob ran the bar and would come out and sing Love Boat. And he was amazing. And that was sort of my first, inspiration for wanting to do lounge singing. But really what brought me into it was a bit of burnout from that work with the Jesuits, and what happened was, I was involved with some pretty heavy duty stuff and didn't really have a way of, I didn't have a support system in place. I was 22, 23 years old. I was thinking about this today, and there's this one incident where I led this South African divestment campaign and really pissed off the president of the university, who was this politically conservative Jesuit. And my salary was frozen. And as a result, sort of as punishment, it was $10,000 a year, which was a big upgrade from my work as a Jesuit volunteer corps member, which was like $85 a month in room and board. But anyway, I was a bit hurt, I think, and I was burning out, or it was compassion fatigue, and I needed some levity in my life. And I started hanging out in San Francisco at these piano bars where people would grab a microphone, and I was doing a little work like sort of on the PR front with some nonprofits, social advocacy as a freelancer essentially. And we did a show for this prison writer that Media Alliance wanted to sponsor. It was a guy named Danny Martin. And I convinced the organization they should throw First Amendment aid. It was like a Jerry Lewis telethon, but I'd get to host and sing Joey Cheesy and the Velveeta Underground. It didn't even exist. Anyway, they didn't know that I was going to be Joey Cheesy. That was my first taste of it. And then odd thing, we were playing in these different venues. Some were really like, it was this place in the Tenderloin, and there was a theme roller skating to Las Vegas. And so I went along with it and put on these rollerblades, and I had this wireless mic, but I used to play ice hockey, so I could really skate. And it was nuts and dangerous. And I thought, this is what I got to do. But really what happened when I got to LA was I started to think about, creating a story around this mythos around Joey Cheesy. And I was still a little bit, I think, resentful of how things went with the Jesuit work that I did, even though now when I look back, I'm enormously grateful. But at the time, I was feeling like, there was no role for me. And so I thought the Jesuits had this idea that, or the liberation theologians in particular, you bring about the kingdom of God by getting in touch with your unique talents, your charisms, and you serve God that way. And I thought, well, what if you were really good at singing, lounge singing and roller skating? Then what do you do? So that was sort of the premise for that show. And I told, it was quasi autobiographical, but it was really about me using these unique charisms to find my people and my community. And I used to get crucified on a palm tree at Kelbo's every night. I did this social analysis of MacArthur Park about cake being a metaphor for community, and the sweet green icing would flow down from these. We hooked up on a palm tree. It was like a crown of cheese thorns, like chunks of cheese with toothpicks, and then the green frosting flowed down, and someone would carry me away in a loincloth. That's how all the shows used to end. I was self-actualized and found my people. But oddly enough, that show allowed me to meet, like my best friends to this day, and do a lot of work on a lot of different levels, do some repair work with my parents. It was really a cool way to be vulnerable and connect with an audience. I'd never done that before. And it was a great experience.
That was beautiful. Well spoken, in such an exciting period, that Joey Cheesy and Velveeta Underground in LA. I mean, that was bubbling away. In fact, did you know Chucky Weiss just died the other day?
I just heard that 2 days ago, right?
I mean,
wow.
what a culture that LA was bubbling up with, the Club Lingerie. And what was your main venue again?
Well, I started out at Kelbo's because no one else would have me. It was this dilapidated tiki bar in West LA on Sawtelle, Sepulveda.
Right. I know.
Yeah.
Then where did you go to after that?
Well, we
didn't you?
We closed down Kelbo's. I had this HBO special that I got to host that was awful, where I got to sing some songs, but again, out of context, made no sense. And then we restaged it. We did. I did a lot of shows at like 3 clubs. Well, what happened was I really decided to get off the blades because that really limits the venues you can play at. I found. So then I just started this band called The Wonderful World of Joey, and we played 3 of clubs. It was mainly our home, but we did a bunch of gigs at House of Blues. Got to open up for the likes of Jamiroquai and Captain and Tennille and Corolla Pandit and Ema Sumac. And yeah, we had a lot of fun with that band. Got to play all over the place.
Anybody who got to open up for Corolla Pandit, it's all right in my. So that was beautiful. So Joe, tell us about this in regards to both social activism and as a performance artist. Screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art, music, film, literature, whatever pursuit is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. So, there are 2 ends of the spectrum, but in regards to social advocacy and you performance artists, talk about the role of intention in your creative process.
That's really a great question. And it's interesting you weave those 2 things because I think I look at it both the same way, which is I agree with Kubrick. I don't think you want to show that hand moving behind things. I think you really want to let people experience with literature and art, performance art, it really makes sense for the person to they be able to be there in the moment. And I don't think you want to be feeling like you're being manipulated. So that makes sense. But interestingly enough, with social activism, where you're trying to engage people with any cause that I've been a part of, I've always worked to make it be the cause of the people that are out there I'm trying to engage, and not my cause or not the organization's cause. And you want them to come to the cause and to feel empowered to be part of it. You don't want to short circuit that. So I think it's really important when you're doing any of that work. A good community organizers know that too. You have to allow people to take ownership of it, and you need to allow them to. You have to give them a model that just doesn't criticize a system or people that maybe you're challenging, but an alternative model that makes things right that they can get behind. And ultimately that's where change occurs. And people need to come to that on their own. But I find that they don't come to it if they're being told by some savior out there that this is the work that they should be doing. They need to really take ownership of the cause.
Yeah. But let's go in music. It's interesting because our commonality is I worked for Frank Zappa, and Moon Zappa, his oldest daughter, well, and he said, I just make this music for myself, and if other people like it, great. And I always say, yeah, but Frank, that's over romanticizing it. If you hit certain notes, I didn't say this to him directly, but this is my feelings from it. If you hit certain notes and say certain words, people will buy your music, and then you'll be able to make more music. So it's all right. But I mean, when you're creating your music, how much are you thinking of your audience before you perform it live to them? Because you were really a live artist.
Yeah.
But how much did you think of them before you hit the stage?
I did. And I did because for whatever reason, my brain gets activated when I'm thinking of when I'm connecting with an audience, and even thinking about connecting with an audience. For example, I'm an okay writer, but if I'm writing and telling a story, and I put it in a narrative on paper, it's okay. If I turn that into a monologue that I know I'm going to be delivering, all of a sudden it comes to life. In fact, I've done that. I've tricked myself when I've done some writing. I think about how people are going to experience it, and also it just that doesn't mean I'm catering to them, but I am conscious of them. But I think Zappa's right too, though. You got to get in touch with something that really inspires you, and you're not, you don't have to worry about. He certainly didn't worry about commercial success or pleasing people. I mean, he did what he wanted to do, and he was lucky he had the freedom to do that. Most artists, don't. But I think it's a really misunderstood thing, this idea of that relationship between a performer and an audience, and what that does, and how that activates the brain and brings forward emotions that they might not have. Some people do, writing is a very solitary thing, and some people can do brilliant things and they can really go deep, but it didn't work for me that way.
Yeah, great golfer said the more you practice, the luckier you get. And my wife's a pro jazz singer, and she'd practice her rap between the songs a lot. And then she'd get on stage and not say anything she practiced. But it was that act of it's this funny line I wanted to tell you earlier that I got. I didn't make it up, but I love it. Is I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity.
Yes.
Because you were trying to do this Velveeta Underground show and not control it too much because you love the spontaneity of it.
Well, not only that, I got into this flow space. It's funny when I look back on it now, no one ever, it was really dangerous, this show, in some ways. We had pyrotechnics, and I was sometimes flinging things into the audience, and I cringe when I think about it now. But I didn't. I got it. It felt right. I wasn't trying to like wreak havoc. I was trying to get people to be present now and to know what they're experiencing was never going to happen again. I never really understood it until I saw Iggy Pop a couple of years ago down here. I'd never seen him perform before. And I thought, oh, he gets in that zone where, he takes everyone with him and he creates this tumult, but it has an effect of grounding. It's like this mindful moment, because it's you're present, and that's what that kind of chaos can do. A real whirling dervish knows how to do that. But I wasn't doing it consciously. It just felt right. And people let me do it. And I did it.
Yeah, that's great.
And interestingly enough, it was, we had a lot of, punk fans, like people that really like raw, in the moment stuff. And I didn't, it never made sense to me because the music wasn't, it was anything but punk, but there was a punk ethos for sure there.
Yeah. It's amazing because Iggy played a Dalai Lama benefit at Carnegie Hall one year, and he stage dived into the audience, and there are a bunch of like rich yuppie people, and they're like, "Excuse me," and he just boom hit the floor. And he says, "Well, I'll never stage dive again." And then within a year, he's still stage diving.
Oh, yeah. It's like 75 and he's still stage diving.
Yeah. Another great performance artist, sort of pioneer, Ruth Draper, said, "The key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in way of imagination and creative power." How do you accomplish that?
You're a receptor and you let it in. It's not even anything that you have to do consciously. Some people, some performers are so self-conscious that they're not able to do that, but there are some people that allow people in. Jack Black's another person live that does this really well. And it's so special to watch. There's just so much energy. It's so powerful that, you can see that as an audience member, you can feel it. There's a vibe, there's a dynamic that's really there. It's really cool, as opposed to just watching a person, perform maybe a beautiful song with a beautiful voice. Not the same, just a different animal.
Really well put. Does the artist have a moral obligation?
Well, this artist does or did. I always felt like, I don't know if I would feel that way if I were performing today, but I certainly used to. But I don't know if it's a moral obligation. Maybe it is a moral obligation to be true and authentic. Yeah. But really, art's about, at the core, it's about bringing together things, disparate ideas oftentimes, and recombining them in novel ways that make sense to the senses. That's really what it is. I don't see, any role for morality in that, but in terms of, an artist definitely has to be authentic more than anything. But that's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's a new question. What happened was, if you do transgressive art, it sort of stemmed from John Waters, rooted for the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. Most people, root for the Good Witch.
Right.
Now, if you do sort of like unusually bad things in your movies, or just, I don't like violent films or anything that's not morally healthy, is that bad? Like, is it causing people to do that, or it's alleviating people to get that out of their system? So
Yeah.
it's something I'm still working on, the wording. I just say, this woman a couple weeks ago, I says, do artists have a moral obligation? She goes, everybody does. And that was good. I mean, I understood what she was saying, but I see how you brought it out. I think what impresses me a lot with you, Joey, is your sense of community and other people, that you need other people.
Well, that's really why I got into it. I mean, and it's funny. It was there was a bit of a gag element to it. I mean, I was making fun of my Messiah complex, but really I needed to find community, and I did, but it's been humbling as of late. I've been really struggling, been here for 9 years, to make friends. I mean, I don't know, we're immigrant, there's other reasons, but we're living in more disconnected ways, and it's hard to break through, and art is a great vehicle to do that. I wish I had that at my fingertips, because I'm now, I mean, my social activism is all about combating social isolation and loneliness now. That's what I'm doing with a new organization that I put together, Social Health, and we're trying to figure out ways of, breaking down barriers and getting people out of silos. But it's really challenging, and I've been thinking about it from like an evolutionary standpoint too. We evolved to live together, to work cooperatively, and to suffer together. The word compassion literally translates to to suffer, the act of suffering together, which we don't really understand. But when we evolved I mean, it did play a role, and Darwin talked about this in Descent of Man, about how compassion and suffering, played a role in natural selection. He understood that when he was nursing a young daughter to her death, and he started to think about it. And I've been thinking about it too, and it's why compassion can feel so natural, and why suffering alone makes us sick. And that's really what we're doing today. I see that especially around grief and loss, which is an area I've been working in for a number of years. We take on board these things, and we don't see them as part of our shared humanity, and they make us neurotic and feel disordered, and it's part of life, but we're losing the community context to make us be able to do that. And it's kind of frightening, and we got a lot of work to do to get back there.
Well, this is great. If God does exist, what do you want God to say to you after you die?
Did you have fun? Was it good for you?
That's good. You're asking God to ask you a question. That's really good. Because you know the answer I get the most. You did fine, but you're saying, he's asking you a question. That is beautiful.
Well, I struggle with that whole notion of a God that can make time for all of us, and it's such a funny idea, but a good question there.
Yeah, it's like the dead person either gets to hell or heaven, and either Saint Peter or the devil standing at the gate, and you look in and they have Zoom, and you go, you have Zoom in heaven or hell? And they go, that's all we have.
That's great. But isn't it cool too, at the same time, like, that we're able to do this kind of stuff? I heard you talking about that the other day, that they're finding that, we're able, some people, do better, communicate better this way, more so after the pandemic too, right?
Well, my deal is, I've done events, discussion groups for 30 years over films, literature, whatever, in a live room, like at Beyond Baroque, in a room, people sitting around, was great. But I found in the last 15, 16 months, it's better on Zoom because people are more attentive, and they're all facially, that eye contact and verbal exchange.
Right.
And so, as you get older, you don't want to drive for an hour to get
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, you got to park, you got to walk upstairs, you got to do all this. So whatever. I mean, we have young people who are willing to do that too. So I just think it's an interesting force change that we had.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have a choice. But let's stay on this thing of death because I want you to talk about it. But the one question in that regard is, can you forget to die?
I don't think so.
So tell us what you mean by befriend death. What's the root of that, those
Yeah.
two words being joined together? Like, where did you get them and suss out what that means?
Well,
Befriend.
I used to talk about it. I was involved. I led a nonprofit in the States called the Green Burial Council. And we were trying to get people to use more environmentally sustainable ways of having end of life rituals, and also being able to embrace their mortality by realizing that death and life are entwined. But the concept of befriending death comes from early Christian monastics who used to go out to the far reaches of the Egyptian desert to befriend death, to have this intense encounter and to contemplate what they were going to eventually be going through. And it became important to us because in about 2000, well, I had this really profound experience doing spiritual direction, which is basically this art of holy listening. And with this old Jesuit I used to know from my days at the University of San Francisco. Long story short, through the process, learned about the fact that I was capable of loving and being loved very deeply, unconditionally, which I had a hard time understanding because of the family that I grew up in. And I was so moved, I wanted to train to do that work, but I didn't want to, I wanted to be able to support other people. None of my friends were religious. My wife and I weren't. So we bought a little place in the middle of the Mojave, about 9 miles north of Joshua Tree National Park. And we were going to do this eco retreat. And it was sort of based on this idea that, like, you know, the Christian desert fathers and mothers who used to go out to the desert to befriend death, we could allow that to happen right here, 2.5 hours away from LA. And we started to think about what kind of rituals we could accommodate. And that led us down this rabbit hole of, wow, I wonder if you could do some of the money could facilitate ecological restoration. And that could be, you know, so that made us want to develop an entity that could protect the idea and develop standards and engage the industry. And so we put the retreat on hold. But that's where it comes from. And it's something I think about all the time, you know, this idea of mortality salience. I think a lot of us are pretty fearful of death, which is why we don't want it in our consciousness. But once you get to the point that you realize that it is something that you can get up and get close to, art allows you to do that too, by the way. You know, it allows you to get, you know, you have safe distance, but you can get real close. And I think for people who can do that, they find a lot of solace in you know, especially at the end of life, rather than, you know, being panicky. It's one of the reasons they've begun, you know, using psychotropics at the end of life as sort of a palliative med. And of course, indigenous communities all over the world have used psychedelics for that reason, you know, to help people transition and help people, I think, on some level, befriend death, see it as something innate, see it as something that, you know, that we need to get real close to. But it's a beautiful concept. I love that term, befriend death.
Yeah, it's really well done. And, you know, my parents they're both passed now, but, you know, they were in Michigan, married for 60 years, raised 4 kids. And they said, you know, if we're hooked up to a machine, pull the plug. And I'm like, dude, I'm not going to pull the plug. That the other kids can pull the plug. I'm not going to hold it against them, but I don't like that. And then it was right when Kevorkian was breaking. You know, we were at a farmer's market in Detroit, and there was Kevorkian, and we went up to him and said, "Oh, hello," you know, and I was like, you know, I finally realized dying with dignity is something important that we have to know about but it was just hard for me to, so for so many years, doctors just sort of killed people, but they didn't tell you we're killing you. They didn't say, well, you make the decision. Do you want them to live for another week or, so that dying with dignity, is that involved with befriending death? Tell me about that.
So there's an organization called Dying with Dignity that's made available voluntary assisted dying here in Australia, at least in Victoria, and it's happening in a couple of other states, as it is in the US. Yeah. And it's such great work. So we've been talking with them and some other entities about doing some end of life companioning so people can more easily transition and have, an easier way out and not be freaked out by, worrying about the pain that they may have to endure. I just heard from a friend 2 days ago whose mother in the States got stage 4 cancer, and she tried to take her own life because she was scared, and that's really what we're putting people up to. It's not humane. There was one of the groups down here. They when they were pushing for dying with dignity legislation, the line was, "Let me die like a dog." We euthanize our pets to allow them to avoid that. It's too bad that we're still so weird about it. But I think that's partly because we have this fear of death and fear of letting go of people we love. And sometimes that trumps what is really best for them.
Yeah. So, Joe, why is it so difficult for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless? I'm not saying life is pointless, but why is it hard for humans to consider that it might be?
Well, it's taken me most of my life to figure out that really, what I really believe in is humanistic and existential philosophy, and I believe that life has no meaning unless you bring meaning to the situation. I brought this up, interestingly enough, with my Jesuit spiritual director, who's 86. I said, because I realize I'm sort of a non-theist, and a lot of these Jesuits, quite frankly, that I knew seemed the same way. I said, I never think about ultimate meaning, like meaning from. He says, I don't either. It's and there's nothing wrong with that. It keeps us on our toes. It means that we need. Now we're talking about the meaning that comes about from oftentimes just displaying decency from one person to another, or acknowledging, their suffering. It doesn't really take a lot, especially in the context of, the kind of companioning we're talking about. But I have no problem thinking that life is meaningless unless we bring it some meaning. I think it's great.
Yeah, you would have loved it. I was at Unurban Coffee House once, and I forgot who it was, but it was some writer for the LA Weekly. Remember the good old days when the LA Weekly was like really a great newspaper, and he brought in 40 people, and I interviewed him in front of that, and I asked him that question. He goes, we all know life's meaningless. He looked at all his friends, and they're all like, yeah. So tell me one major element of you and your creative process that's changed in your 40 decade, or your many years doing it, and one element that stayed the same.
Well, one thing that I guess I've always liked to do is not be afraid of bringing things together that typically had never come together before, or don't seem like they should come together. I've always found that to be really exciting. I do this, my wife will tell you, in the kitchen, she's like a really great cook because she follows recipes, and I wing it. And sometimes the food's amazing and I come up with some really interesting things, and other times it's not edible. But I don't really have a good sense. I'm not very artistic. I don't have a good cooking aesthetic, I guess, but I can do it, with some other things, and that's always been there. and I always I'm glad I do that in every kind of work that I've ever taken on. I've tried to innovate by doing that. I guess the one thing that I kind of changed a little bit on it was, who Benoit Mandelbrot is, the guy that discovered fractal geometry, really amazing man. The Mandelbrot set he created, and I got to do this really cool research project years ago for IBM where I got to talk to their top technologists about about their creative process and how they work past difficulties, and he was one of them. And he used to talk about, I thought I was writing a chapter for a potential book, and I was trying to get him to talk about sort of the outsider perspective, beginner brain, but talking about, he'd moved around from all these different fields. And I said, and it was relevant because what you find, like all the Nobel laureates of the 20th century, for example, they had their big breakthroughs within about 10 years of studying, certain area, and we start to assimilate our fields and we get in ruts. And I was trying to use him to explain that, and he wouldn't have a bar of it. And he said, now, when people leave one field and jump to another, they're like immigrants who leave the old country, and they're so ashamed of where they've been that they let go. And I realize as I've gotten older that, I'll move from one field where I don't want people to know about that Joey Cheesy thing or and now I let it all bleed. And I think the reason I have an interesting perspective and I can still do good creative work is because of all those life experiences that I want to allow to, wash over me. But that's not necessary. I didn't do it earlier in my life. I wanted to go out as, being
Right.
treated a certain way as a performance artist or writer, investigative reporter, whatever I was trying to be at the time. But I guess that's one of the beauties of growing old. You don't care as much what people think, and you can be liberated from that. And that's what I've given up on for sure.
Well put, Joe. Warhol said it great. He says, just keep making your art. Don't worry about what people think of it, or think of who you are or what you've done. But tell me the spelling on the fractal guy, Ben.
Mandelbrot, Madlebrot. There's a really interesting study that was done with chimpanzees, to Warhol's point. This I came about across when I was doing that same work. Did you ever hear the study? They give chimpanzees paint and canvas and brushes, and they allow them to start making art, and they're just doing these different things. Some of it's really cool. I mean, when it starts out, they're able to actually have a play, and the chimps, and we share about, I don't know, 98.99999% genetic makeup with those guys. They didn't want to have sex or eat, or they were really just so into their art. And then the researcher introduced a banana that he would give the chimp every time the chimp would hand over one of the paintings to him. And what happened was, gradually they would notice that the chimp was doing less and less and less on the painting, that just to get the banana. They co-opted them, They were completely enthralled. And that's oftentimes what happens with extrinsic rewards in the creative process.
Totally. That was good. So what do you think the motive of the cave artist was?
Wow. That's a good one. Obviously, I would say probably to communicate and memorialize. It was probably, well, my guess, I wouldn't be surprised if it was created, if it was done in conjunction with some ritual, some passage of time or some marking that may have been done. But I have nothing to base that on. completely spitballing. I have no idea. Great question.
No, that's what all these are. Just whatever your hunch is. Like Lily Tomlin said it so well. Reality is just a collective hunch.
Well, it is, but it's interesting. I mean, and I guess that's my bias now because I'm looking at everything through the lens of, how we used to innately just have ritual to mark passages. We don't do that anymore. I mean, we have religious rituals for people who are religious, but we used to probably take time and pause and we did that. Probably it would have made more sense when we lived, more harmoniously in nature. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, a couple experimental filmmakers, actually George Manupelli, who's from Ann Arbor, Michigan, started the Experimental Film Festival there 60 years ago. Film's only 130 years. So can you imagine Ann Arbor's been showing half the year, half the length of the invention of the cinema. So his mantra is ignore yourself. And Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So of course it's both and it depends. But do you think art making, music making is more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever culture or technology is dominant?
Mm. Well, it certainly can be both. It's funny I was thinking about what you said about your wife as a jazz artist. There's, there are certain forms of expression where you just let flow and things happen. I mean, I play around with melody with a lot, and I can't harmonize to save my life, but I have fun like a jazz singer would. Like a lot of great jazz singers have no idea what is going to happen before. Some you can tell have rehearsed. They're improvising, but it's like it's like memorizing a solo, a note for note solo. Whereas some people just shred and get lost and just emerges. Obviously you have to have some technical proficiency to do that, but that's I mean, we're all products of our environment. So art would be, the culture is going to play a role, and often it's in really good ways. If you look at Paris and Berlin last century, when people got together, in community, artists really inspired each other to do some amazing things. Those guys were products of their culture. So it's not always bad, but that's an interesting one too.
Can art making, music making be egoless?
I don't know. Next.
Yeah, that was good though. See, the beauty is there's no right or wrong answers to any of this. It's all like,
well, the prizes on this game show suck from what I've been told. So.
Your first pass was my favorite ever. I've ever had people pass. Is perception reality?
Often it is. Yeah. Often it is. Yep. And it's one of those things again, as you get older and wiser, you hope you realize that, you check yourself and you realize you think you're dealing with reality and you're really dealing with your perception. Yeah.
Yeah. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Wow. Well, if you have conviction and you don't want to compromise, I don't know if it's because of all that's going on in the world, especially in my old country. But I really think if you lose the ability to compromise, you're in trouble, especially when it means coming together for the greater good. So you could potentially have, I think society needs people who are better at compromising and then having convictions, for sure.
Yeah, Joe, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. And who got that sort of started my interviewing career with Christine McKenna. Remember the great writer, Christine McKenna, right? In LA Weekly. And
oh, right.
Just, and interviewed David Lynch and Captain Beefheart and everybody, and that was one of her main questions, and I just like love that question because it took 25 years before one guy goes, "What's more important, conviction or compromise?" He goes, "Depends on what you mean by important." He totally shifted the two, but it's so easy. People want to feel that conviction is what that drives them. And I sort of feel that, well, of course, we already know conviction's there, but really, are you able to compromise? So
Well,
it's yeah.
And also we want to have, I think a lot of people don't like living in the question, they're not good with gray. They don't, and as you get older, you realize you got to be really good at saying goodbye to things and living with these mysteries that we're never going to solve,
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's a hard thing to admit that compromise is important, because it's sort of like, well, you're taking, you're stepping down.
yeah.
I mean, whatever. But
it doesn't mean you're being weak.
Yeah.
Because it means you're being open to the possibility that you need to be, you might be wrong, but it's also, I just see it. I mean, democracy certainly can't work without compromise. If people are just going to manage self-interest and just stick to their guns, like, you see what you have now, that entrenchment, that doesn't work. It's
like this one too. I've added this one just recently. Where'd you get your work ethic from?
I don't know. That's a good one.
Most people say, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Most people say their parents, because that's where we get it. And if you look up work ethic in Wikipedia, about the third paragraph down, it says, this could be a scam from consumer capitalism culture.
That's good.
Because the flip is the next question: how do you find peace of mind?
Well, self-acceptance and self-compassion, I've discovered, contribute to a lot of that. And I've struggled with that, I think, most of my life. But just being able to really, not just be your authentic self, but to really embrace and love your authentic self. It can be a real challenge, but I think it contributes to a lot of peace and well-being.
Yeah. I love you repeating compassion, because I used it to woo my wife. I use compassion. Words evoke more than their meaning, because you told us that etymology breakdown earlier, but you can even expand words to say more than their meaning, So you've accomplished a lot. Rate these three elements in your accomplishments: luck, skill, and ambition. What played the most important role, second and third?
Gosh, I can see all of them, and some people don't want to admit luck, but I would say luck and privilege at the top. Have to. I mean, and I think people are nuts to say anything else. We could have been born in so many circumstances where that was the case, and that's pure luck. So luck for sure.
Yeah. So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength. Normally, we're taught to overcome a weakness.
Yeah.
Tell me a weakness that you've incorporated to become a strength.
Well, I have the mind that I guess some might consider me having the ADHD profile, but I have a mind that can move in a lot of directions quickly that I have a hard time keeping up with. It gets bored, it's scanning, and that used to really frustrate me, and I felt sort of disordered from not being able to drill down the way some people could. And I've come to realize that is such a great strength, and there's probably again, it serves a purpose from an evolutionary standpoint. You know, you need people scanning. But one of the things it's allowed me to do is be a little bit prescient about certain things. So I get real excited seeing new ideas on the horizons and new possibilities. And it's because I don't get too bogged down, you know, with things in front of me. So that ability to scan, which can make things very difficult, like finishing, you know, degrees and such. It's I now realize it's a great gift.
Dude, that was so well put. I totally relate to it because I think I was super hyperactive as a kid too. And I was like, I never specialized. And one of my main teachers taught me, don't specialize. And it's like, what? and I think we're lucky because I don't know, we didn't come from the generation where if you're hyperactive, your parents started giving you drugs.
Right.
They just let you be hyperactive. Like, go
Right.
play in the yard, go play outside.
Yeah. Hit that ball against the wall. I know.
Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When you're combating injustice and you need to really stand up to oppressive forces.
Yeah, well, that's
when outrage is really justified.
Yeah, that's interesting because Utah Phillips, great political folk singer, said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Yeah, that's a good one too. What was the actual line?
His line is, well, it's funny because a professional anarchist said that's not true, but I love the line. It's anarchy is making rules for yourself, not others.
Right.
I mean, that's sort of a cute way to put it in a digestible way, but it's really like, you know, I just set up questions with stupid quotes sometimes, but the real question is who's like you talked about social oppression, colonialization, you know, anything, you know, racism, all these problems we have, who's entitled to make the rules?
The privileged historically, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, we're winding down. We got about 5 more minutes. This has been super fun.
I went fast.
Yeah.
Is this a bonus round? I gotta.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Wow. I would say to I wouldn't say embrace your authentic self to probably a 12-year-old. Be who you are always, and know that could change. So the person you think you are at 12 may not be the person you are at 30 or 50, but don't be afraid to embrace who you are fully. Don't feel bad about being yourself. That's all you got.
Wow, that was good. Because when I asked my mom, "Can I interview you?" She goes, "Yeah, but everything I say today, I might change to if I did it tomorrow." I goes, "That's all right." And you know that introduces Alan Watts back into the picture because he said everybody's trying to figure out who they are. Once you figure out who you are, you're fucked. You know, and I mean, I think it's more you're saying don't have fear in embracing who you are.
And it's the journey to find out and discover who you are, which is a lifelong process. He's right. You are fucked if you think you figured it out and you're done. Then you are done living.
Yep. Yeah. So he has 5 really fun, simple, short questions, just like 3 to 5 words each.
Okay.
You can answer. Who started it all?
We'll never know.
Ah, very good. Are we going to make it?
I hope so. I think so.
Where do we put it?
We'll know when we find it.
Who's cleaning it up?
Oh, not me this time.
Is it serious?
But yes, but not too not too serious to laugh at.
Yeah. That's like back to Frank Zappa. He said, I'm serious about being not serious.
Yeah.
Isn't that great? You know, I realized I took a note earlier. What you do reminds me of alchemy. Is alchemy is you take two known things and you put them together,
Yeah.
and then you come up with a third unknown thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it bubbles over and smells really bad in the room and you need to clear it out. And then sometimes it's just magic.
Yeah. And you got to have the courage to do, like, what does courage mean to you now? I mean, that's like that's courageous. What you were doing with Joey Cheesy was courageous. And I mean, your whole career, but what does courage mean to you now?
Well, it really means trying to embrace what I perceive my authentic self to be now, and having the courage to not pack in on that. I see that happening with some older people that I've been that oftentimes are made to feel like they either can't participate in the economy or the culture, or they're not wanted, and you see that they isolate, which is what chronic loneliness is all about. And I hope that doesn't happen to me, that I will always have the courage to know that my life matters and that I have a right to live a healthy, happy existence. And I hope I have the courage to always remember that.
You know, I was wondering, what's more fundamental, language or music?
More fundamental. Well, it's interesting because there are that Indigenous Australians talk about song a lot in communicating spiritual concepts, and if you think about what happens on a level with life, this rhythm that's being beaten out with life and death and good and bad and chaos and order, there is something that we need to get in sync with, so perhaps music is more fundamental.
Yeah. Very interesting, because Chomsky says that a language is not just words. It's culture, tradition, unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. When it doesn't do that, when language doesn't do that, how do you cope with it?
How do you cope with it?
Yeah. What's your coping mechanisms?
Well, I think that's partly why we feel as unwell as we do today. I mean, because we're living in a culture that has some gaps. We're living in a very disconnected way that we didn't evolve to live like over millions of years. Over a relatively short period of time, we've taken on this idea that it's okay to live in a way where we can be in our little silo and not have contact with our neighbors and not, have connection that we clearly evolved to have in our lives.
Yeah.
So what the outcome is mental illness and social isolation and loneliness and, a lot of anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
Chomsky's spot on.
Yeah. But I mean, how do you personally cope with it?
Well, it's funny. I found it enormously humbling over the last 8 or 9 years dealing with loneliness. And so, I felt like I could have been run for mayor in Los Angeles. And I took my son back there 2 years ago. And I felt like I was coming to life through the eyes of others, But what happens when you don't have eyes upon you, people that know you, and you lose your identity a bit.
Yeah.
And so I've been very humbled by that, and it's made me really have empathy for others who have struggled with it. But I don't know. What keeps me going is knowing that there's no, what is the alternative to just pack it
Right.
in? It's
Yeah. No, that's it. Another great Zappa line I learned was, "Don't stop and keep going."
Yeah.
It's pretty simple. Joey, tell me something good you never had and you never want.
that I never had and never want, but it's still good.
Yep.
Wow, that's an amazing question. Um, wow, that something good that I never had and never want. Well, um, I don't know. A gold record? I don't know. I mean, I guess I could see there being a lot of good things for other people. That's what it would be. Recognition,
Yeah.
you know, a global recognition for some accomplishment. That doesn't really mean much to me, but I could see how it matters to others.
Yeah, that's that. I love gold record because the three most popular answers are fame, money, and heroin.
Yeah, but but who doesn't want money? I mean, you don't have to be overwhelmed by it, but how many
Right.
people say no to it?
Yeah, exactly. So if you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Oh, I'd say this is just not a good day. Well, you'd have to take a dip in the vomit and clear off the shit. I guess that's what are you gonna do?
Beautiful. If a publisher was to release your autobiography, just off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Ah, O Felix Culpa, which is this great Latin saying, and it was a Catholic prayer, I guess. It's sometimes used, but it's my favorite uh, phrase. It means translates to "Oh happy fault," and the idea is that even when some of the worst things happen to us, they bring about the best, and you don't know at the time, that something that's really messed up is going to lead to more messed up things or wonderful things. But it also acknowledges the fact that we're all broken, and there's beauty in that, and we need to accept it.
It's a great title. They want to scent the glue in the binding of your autobiography. What smell would it be?
Oh wow. Aerosolized cheese. I don't know. Smell. Mm, I'm not a big smell guy. My wife is. She was an aromatherapist. She when on our second date, I said that I'd like to smell her things sometimes, and she'd never let that down. It was not just didn't come out the right way. Um, gosh, I'll have to pass on that again.
No, that was good. No, I love the story behind it. See, it's all more important. The anecdotes and the stories are what really suss this thing out.
Yeah.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed, and what would it be made of?
Oh, wow. Well, maybe. Okay. Well, the only thing I can think of that would be remotely interesting to me would be it would be it would be at the corner of Pico and Sawtell where cowboys used to stand.
Yeah,
They used to have those big tikis,
yeah,
but it would be like a ginormous a statue, all made with the different forms of cheese products that just sort of bind together. And it wouldn't last very long, but it would be a beautiful thing to behold for the few couple hundred fans that still may be
yeah.
out there.
It's such a tribute to those days in LA in the 80s. Because once in a while I find in the garbage people throwing out old LA weeklies. And it's so fun to see the ads and who's playing at Club Lingerie. And,
Oh my God.
it's just, what that
Well,
was so.
it was so much easier too. That was your Bible. Like the whole world was there,
Right.
It's so easy to access.
Yeah. And so Joseph Boy's artist said, make the secrets productive. Lou Welsh said, guard the secrets and constantly reveal them. But it was Thornton Wilder in 1928. He said, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but it's not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time.
Mm.
You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
Well, right now, it's all about, for me, trying to figure new ways for myself and others to really combat this social isolation and loneliness thing, and figure out creative strategies for letting people, remember that we had these connections at one time and we can have them again. And it's really what makes life worth living, that we need them. And I'm doing that. I mean, I have a new charity that I'm leading, and I'm dedicating my life to that for the next little while.
That's super, because we've listed that website on our link so people can visit it. And I think it's, who do we owe to getting us together? I think it's Pat Tierney, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
Isn't that amazing? He entered my film festival 30 years ago with Eric Sack.
Yep.
Yeah, Pixel toy video camera. So it took us 30 years to get together, and it worked.
And he was the art director at the Cowboy shows and did more than anyone ever knows, and was enormously inspiring. You got to get him on the show. You got to.
I asked him. He sort of said he will. A lot of people say no, and I go, that's fine. I mean, it's all right. I want them to feel they're willing, and I felt that. You really got it, and we've had a ball. So the last question, Joe, is such a pleasure being here with you, and it's been truly enlightening. That's what I like. When people get it, we're just here to have fun, but at the same time, you can learn some life lessons here. I did. What gives you the most optimism?
Well, I think that we're a naturally resilient species, and what gives me the most optimism is thinking that whatever that we're worrying about right now, we have some big things to worry about. There's things that we've done over decades or hundreds of years, or maybe a couple thousand, but we evolved over millions of years on this planet. And what gives me hope is knowing that there's been a lot of great work up until this time that has helped us be able to get through times associated with adversity and uncertainty. And we're facing some stuff that, I mean, this is incredible. And but I think that we do have it within us to steer the ship around and to reconnect and to figure all this out. And I'm hopeful about that.
Beautiful.
And again, what else? What other choice do you have but to be hopeful?
Hey, onward and upward. I love it. Joe, thanks so much. It's really been fun.